Most people hear the phrase, the dark side of the moon, and think the mystery is somewhere out there, hanging over a silent crater field that no one on Earth can see. But the more unsettling part is not out there at all. It is here, in the way people live every day, as if the visible side of anything is the whole thing. And that is why this matters right now. In April 2026, Artemis II carried human beings back around the moon for the first crewed lunar flyby since the Apollo era. The crew passed behind the far side, lost contact with Earth for about 40 minutes, broke the human distance record, and looked directly at terrain that reminded everyone of a simple truth. Familiar is not the same as fully known. Now, if we are going to talk about this seriously, we should talk about it accurately. The phrase dark side is dramatic, but it is not technically right. The far side of the moon is not permanently dark. It gets sunlight, just like the side we see from Earth. We call it the far side because it faces away from us due to the moon being tidally locked, which means the same face points toward Earth as it orbits. And there is another correction worth making early. This was not the first time human eyes had ever seen the far side. Apollo 8 astronauts saw it in 1968. What makes this moment historic is different. Artemis II is the first crewed return to the moon's vicinity since 1972, and it gave the world a fresh human encounter with the far side under new flight conditions, new lighting, new instruments, and a new public attention span. That matters because truth gets stronger when it is described cleanly instead of exaggerated. That clean description already tells you something important about human consciousness. People often think growth happens when a shocking new fact arrives and flips everything upside down. Most of the time, that is not what happens. What changes people more deeply is a correction, a small, precise correction. Not, the moon has a hidden side. We already knew that. The correction is this. You can know a thing exists, study it, map it, photograph it, teach it, and still live as if your own angle is enough. That is a much harder truth to sit with because it reaches far beyond astronomy. The moon is the perfect example of how familiarity can make people intellectually lazy. It hangs above us our whole lives. Children draw it. Lovers talk under it. Writers use it. Religions time themselves around it. Calendars lean on it. And because it is always there, it begins to feel complete. Not because it is complete, but because we are used to it. That is one of the quiet traps of being human. Repetition creates confidence. Confidence starts pretending to be understanding. Then one day, something reminds you that you were living off one face, one angle, one return view. And suddenly, the old confidence looks less like wisdom and more like a shortcut. That is why the moon's far side hits differently right now. It is not a story about some spooky, hidden corner of the sky. It is a story about what happens when a familiar object stops cooperating with your assumptions. The near side never lied to anyone. It just was not the whole story. And most of the stories people trust are built the same way. A relationship may not be false, but it may be incomplete. A belief may not be wrong, but it may be under-examined. A routine may not be broken, but it may be narrowing you. Human beings rarely get trapped only by lies. More often, they get trapped by partial truths they stopped testing. Artemis II makes that idea feel immediate because this was not an abstract thought experiment. On April 6, 2026, the crew wrapped a historic lunar flyby after a 7-hour observation period around the moon. They broke the record for the farthest humans had ever traveled from Earth, reaching roughly 252,756 miles away. and at closest approach passed about 4,067 miles above the lunar surface. During the far-side pass, Orion went into an expected communications blackout for around 40 minutes as the moon blocked signals to Earth. That means there was a real stretch of time when 4 people were moving behind the moon with no direct contact, no running commentary coming back at them, and no ordinary sense of Earth still talking back. And then look at what they actually saw. NASA said the crew photographed and described impact craters, ancient lava flows, ridges, cracks, changes in texture, and differences in brightness and color across the surface. They watched Earth drop below the lunar horizon in an Earthset and later return in an Earthrise. During an eclipse period, they reported flashes created by meteoroids hitting the moon. Reuters described the far side as a shadowed, heavily cratered hemisphere, where the astronauts directly observed impact flashes. BBC reported that the astronauts dimmed Orion's cabin lights to cut reflections on the windows so they could study the surface more carefully. This was not just a scenic pass. It was humans trying to look better, longer, and more honestly at something that never shows us its full face from home. That detail about the cabin lights matters more than it first sounds. They did not improve the view by inventing a new moon. They improved the view by reducing glare. That is one of the clearest ways to think about consciousness. A lot of the time, the problem is not that reality has hidden everything from you. The problem is that you are trying to look through your own reflection. Your impatience, your habits, your speed, your need to conclude too quickly, your attachment to what already makes sense. All of that is glare. It keeps you from seeing texture. It keeps you from noticing contrast. It keeps you from realizing that what looked flat from a distance becomes rugged when you stop rushing the view. There is also something powerful about the blackout itself. People talk a lot about discovery, as if it is mostly a matter of collecting more data. But some of the most important moments in human awareness arrive when feedback drops away. When Orion slipped behind the moon, Earth could not keep speaking into the moment. For about 40 minutes, the crew still existed, still moved, still observed, but without ordinary contact. That kind of silence strips away the illusion that understanding is always something handed back to you in real time. Sometimes perception gets sharper when the commentary stops. Sometimes the mind matures when it cannot immediately outsource certainty. Now think about the moon in 3 ways at once. To a scientist, the far side is not poetic decoration. It is a real landscape with different geology. Nature noted that the far side has a thicker crust, far fewer of the vast dark lava plains that dominate the near side, and many more impact craters. In other words, the face we do not live with every night is not just visually different. It tells a different geological story. To an ordinary person, that same fact lands in a simpler way. You spend your whole life looking at one version of the moon, and then you are reminded that the object you thought you knew best has another face with another history written all over it. Not another fantasy, another history, another texture, another arrangement, another record of what it has endured. The moon suddenly feels less like a symbol and more like a warning against shallow familiarity. And in the third sense, the far side becomes personal. Not because it sends you secret messages, but because it exposes how often people operate on front-facing information only. They know the version of themselves that performs well in public, but not the version that appears under pressure. They know the pleasant side of someone they admire, but not the side built by scars, old impacts, and quiet decisions no one saw. They know the polished surface of an idea, but not the deeper structure holding it up. The hidden half of life is not always mystical. More often, it is simply the part you never needed to face because the visible side was convenient enough. This is where the consciousness part becomes real. Human consciousness is not only about collecting new facts, it is about changing the standard by which you call something known. And that standard changes the moment one angle stops being enough. Before that shift, a person thinks knowledge means recognition. I have seen this before, so I understand it. After that shift, recognition is no longer enough. You start asking harder questions. What am I not seeing? What conditions would make this look different? What part of this only appears from another position? What disappears when I only trust the familiar face? That is a harder way to live, but it is a deeper one. People love the relief of certainty. A closed picture is useful. It saves time. It keeps life moving. It lets you decide quickly who someone is, what something means, what matters, what does not, what can be ignored, what must be carried. But closed pictures come with a price. They flatten reality. They reward convenience over depth. They quietly train the mind to confuse speed with clarity. And then one real encounter, one far-side moment, shows you how much of your confidence was built on incomplete sight. This is why the moon can change you right now without any need for theatrical claims. Not because the far side is somehow sending energy into your room, because the event forces a cleaner question into your head. Where else in my life have I treated one visible face as the whole thing? That question is not mystical. It is demanding. It can reach into your judgments, your loyalties, your assumptions, your self-image, your habits of attention, and the stories you have repeated so often that they no longer feel like stories at all. Maybe that is why Christina Koch told NBC that when she looked out at the far side, the darker markings were not where she was used to seeing them. That is such a human detail, not a dramatic proclamation, just a felt disorientation. Something in you notices that the pattern is wrong, or rather that your pattern was limited. And once you feel that, even briefly, you cannot completely go back. The old map still exists, but it no longer feels complete. Notice what this does not require. It does not require rejecting the near side. It does not require pretending everything you knew before was useless. It does not require performance. The Earth-facing side of the moon is real. The public side of people is real. The obvious explanation is often partly real. The first impression may contain truth. The problem begins when a first truth starts acting like a final truth. That is where consciousness hardens. That is where curiosity dries up. That is where people stop growing while still telling themselves they understand. And there is another layer to this. The far side of the moon is rougher, more heavily cratered, less dominated by the smooth, dark plains that define the familiar face. Nature pointed out that one reason scientists are so interested in it is that the far side preserves a different record of the moon's history, including enormous impact structures such as the Oriental Basin. That means the side we do not casually live with is, in some ways, the side that keeps more evidence of old collisions. That is not just good science. It is a meaningful way to think about perception. The smoother face is easier to live with. The rougher face often tells the longer story. People do this with each other all the time. They trust the smoother face because it is easy to read. They overlook the cratered side because it asks for patience. They react to polish and miss history. They react to fluency and miss depth. They react to what is comfortable to name and miss what is costly to understand. But the rough side of anything, a person, a place, a memory, an era, often carries the better record. Not the prettier record, the better one. That is why this moment should not merely inspire awe. Awe is easy. Awe asks nothing from you once the view is gone. The more useful response is embarrassment, a useful kind of embarrassment. The kind that arrives when you realize how easily you settle, how quickly you treat what is visible as sufficient, how often you let familiarity shut down inquiry. The moon did not fail to show you everything. Earth gave you one angle. Physics gave you one angle. Distance gave you one angle. And for centuries, that was enough for ordinary life. But now that the far side has returned to public consciousness through real human observation, pretending one angle is enough starts looking less innocent. In daily life, that shift can become practical very quickly. You may find yourself slowing down before calling something obvious. You may become less impressed by surface consistency, because repetition no longer automatically feels like truth. You may notice how many situations have a visible face that behaves well in public, and a far side built from older forces, older impacts, older decisions. You may hear someone speak with confidence and wonder what their unlit half would reveal. You may catch yourself telling a neat story about your own life and suddenly feel where the missing half has been edited out. That is not paranoia. It is not cynicism either. It is a more serious respect for incomplete pictures. And strangely enough, that respect can make you more humane. People become harsh when they think they have seen the whole thing too quickly. They become careless with labels. They become addicted to summary. Once you understand that even the moon, the oldest familiar object in the night sky, still punishes shallow certainty, it becomes harder to reduce people and experiences into cheap conclusions. The irony is that human beings are capable of tremendous exploration outward while remaining shockingly lazy inward. We can send a crew around the moon, build the mathematics, train the eyes, time the flyby, survive the blackout, document the surface, and still come home and live by cardboard interpretations of our own lives. That is what makes this event worth talking about. Not the spectacle alone, the contrast. We know how to cross physical distance. The harder distance is the one between a surface reading and a deeper one. And maybe that is the real meaning of the far side entering the conversation again in 2026. Not that humanity has run out of mystery, but that it has run out of excuses for pretending visible means complete. Artemis II did not merely give the public another space milestone. It refreshed a standard. It reminded us that direct seeing still matters, that human observation still adds something even in an age of robotic imaging, and that one of the oldest objects in our sky can still confront the laziness of human perception. So if this hidden side of the moon is changing anything in you right now, it is probably not changing your feelings first. It is changing your tolerance for incomplete pictures. It is reducing your willingness to call something understood too early. It is pressuring the part of your mind that loves neat summaries. It is asking whether you are serious enough to live with a larger standard of seeing. Because once a familiar object has publicly reminded you of its hidden half, the burden shifts. The burden is no longer on the moon to be mysterious. The burden is on you to stop being superficial. That may sound severe, but it is useful. Consciousness does not grow only through comfort. Sometimes it grows because something exposes a bad habit in the way we look. This moment does that. It exposes how much of ordinary certainty is built on front-facing evidence. It exposes how easily people mistake repeated visibility for full truth. It exposes how often we stop turning the thing over because the visible face already works well enough for conversation. The moon is not asking for worship here. It is asking for better thinking. It is asking for discipline in attention. It is asking for the humility to admit that one face is not the whole object. One season is not the whole person. One performance is not the whole character. One chapter is not the whole life. One explanation is not the whole reality. That is a tougher message than comfort, but it is also more useful than comfort. And that is where I want to leave this. Not with a soft landing, not with a whispered promise, with a standard. The far side of the moon has been there the whole time. The question is not whether hidden things exist. Of course they do. The question is what you do now that you have been reminded in public and in real time that the visible side of anything can be true and still incomplete. If you walk away from this and keep treating one angle as enough, then the moon has taught you nothing. If you hear about the blackout, the distant flyby, the cratered far side, the record-setting pass, the Earth set, the impact flashes, and still return to lazy certainty in your own life, then you missed the most important part of the whole event. The deeper lesson is not that reality hides things from us. It is that we often stop looking long before reality has finished showing them. So, the next time you look up and see that familiar face hanging over the world, remember what it no longer allows you to pretend. Familiar does not mean finished. Visible does not mean complete. And one side, no matter how beautiful, is never the whole story.